What's going on, everybody? I wanted to give you all a quick update about what's going to be going on in our student ministry this summer before we jump into our lesson. Everything's kind of starting to open back up, and so I wanted to share with you guys what that means for us. So, our high school groups, hopefully next week, are going to be able to start meeting in person. Now, we're not going to be able to meet at the building, so I'm going to try to figure out exactly what days, but we're going to try to start meeting in person outside, maybe at a park or at whatever restaurants are open, stuff like that. It might just be in our small groups, but we're going to try to make that work and try to get connected. So hopefully that's going to start next week. As far as junior high, it's going to be a bit longer. We're going to keep doing our weekly Zoom calls on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. So we're going to do that probably through the month of June, if not just for the next few weeks, until we can start meeting back in person as well. And now also about summer camps. Unfortunately, our summer camps have been canceled. I was really hopeful that we could be able to have them, but because of just some of the rules and the guidelines that we have to follow, they're just not able to happen. So Butler Springs went ahead and canceled both of the high school and junior high camps that we were going to attend. So we're still trying to figure out, what other options we have as far as what we can do this summer. It's still going to be great. We're still going to have a ton of fun. Just unfortunately, we're not going to be able to go to camp. So this Tuesday night at 7 p.m., we're going to have a Zoom call for all of our high school students. I'm going to try to explain some bit more about what we're going to be able to do this summer and how we're going to start opening back up. So if you're in high school, hopefully you can join. I'm going to be posting the link for that, and hopefully send it, and I'm going to send that out in email as well. So hopefully, if you're in high school, you can tune into that. At junior high, this Wednesday, we're going to start our Zoom back up as well. So we are starting a new series this week. It's titled Jesus Is, and so we're going to be talking about just who Jesus is and why that matters. When we talk about Jesus, everyone has an opinion, right? Now, whether you've been in church your whole life or you're kind of new to coming to church, new to a youth group, everyone has heard about Jesus. We all have an idea of who Jesus is. Now, some people think Jesus is just a nice guy. Some people know him as a carpenter. Some know him just as a regular guy. Now, others maybe even a teacher. Some of you might think, just when you hear Jesus, think of the guy who walks on water. But whoever you think Jesus is, we want to take a couple weeks to talk about who he really is. And now, who you think Jesus is, what you believe about Jesus, affects every part of your life. And so, what you believe about Jesus, that's important. And so that's why we're going to be talking about it the next few weeks. So, who is Jesus? That's a great question, and that's something that I want to ask you. So, just take a second and think to yourself, what's one or two words that you would use if someone asked you, who is Jesus? Like, who do you think he is? And who do other people say Jesus is? Like, what are some things that people that think Jesus is? What about your friends or people at school? Who do they say Jesus is? I feel like people have always been asking that question. People have always been wondering who Jesus is, even when he was still here on earth. He knew people were wondering who he was, so one day he asked his friends and followers, the disciples, what they thought. And that's recorded in Matthew chapter 16. So I'm going to read starting in verse 13. It says, "When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, 'Who do people say the Son of Man is?' They replied, 'Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets.' 'But what about you?' he said. 'Who do you say I am?' Simon Peter answered, 'You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God.'" Now, the disciples responded with a list of who people said they were. They were answering Jesus' question. Now, according to them, people thought Jesus was either Elijah, maybe John the Baptist, maybe one of the other prophets. They weren't really sure who Jesus was. But it kind of seems like people thought he was either a good teacher or just some religious leader. And now, they were close, but they weren't exactly right. Jesus just isn't another prophet. Jesus is God. Now, after his disciples answered Jesus' question, and he asked them another question. This time, he didn't want to know what everyone else thought. He wanted to know what his disciples thought. He wanted to know who they thought he was. And so, Peter just jumps in an answer. We talked about Peter a couple weeks ago, that he was kind of going to be impulsive and just the first one to speak. So Peter answers, and he says that Jesus was two things. He says the Messiah. And now the Messiah was the one who was going to save God's people. And Peter also says, you're the Son of the living God. So basically he was saying he was God. So when we think about forgiveness, and we think, for us, maybe it's hard to forgive others. Maybe it's easy. Maybe it's hard for us to ask for forgiveness. But when we think about forgiveness, a lot of times we think of the things that we do when we mess up towards other people and we hurt other people. And one common theme about forgiveness, though, is that the only person who can truly forgive us is the person that we have harmed, right? And so a lot of times in the Gospels, we read about different stories. Pastor Roger actually today read a story about Jesus offering forgiveness. And so when Jesus offers forgiveness, he's letting us know that we did something to harm us or to harm him. And now, that's kind of hard to wrap our heads around, that Jesus is offering us forgiveness. So what did we do against him? Because it's 2,000 years later. So how do we do anything against Jesus? Well, because God created everything, you, me, the world, everything in it. Anytime we harm ourselves, others, or the world we live in, anytime we sin, we're harming the God who created those things. And so all of the sins that we do, all of the times that we fall short of the commands of God, we are sinning against him. Now, that means the time that we cheated on a test, the time that we punched one of our siblings, that's the time that we talked back to our parents. Those are actually also sins against God. And that's bad news. But there's also good news. Because every sin is a sin against God, God has the authority to forgive every sin. God is the only one that has the authority to forgive all of our sins. So when Jesus tells us that he has the authority to forgive sins, he's making a big statement. He's claiming, I'm not just a good teacher. My authority comes from God because I am God. And so there's some people out there in the world today that said, Jesus didn't actually think he was God. Well, according to the Bible, Jesus makes it very clear that he is claiming to be God. So who is Jesus? Well, today, the main point that we are talking about that Jesus is that Jesus is God. And now that's so important because if Jesus is God, then what he said is true. All the words that are recorded in the Gospels and the New Testament of Jesus, they're true, including when he says that he is the only way to the Father, the only way to heaven. And so maybe you're thinking, okay, like Jesus is God, that's great, but what does that mean for me? Like, why does that matter? Well, since Jesus is God, like it makes all of the difference. It should change everything about our lives, our faith. Because if you think Jesus is just a good teacher, then he's not worth following, right? If he's just a good person, a nice guy, then great, we can pick and choose what words of his we want to follow. But if he is God, then it changes everything. And maybe knowing Jesus is God has already changed your life. Maybe you've already made a decision to follow after Jesus, to be baptized, and to make disciples. But no matter where you are on your journey of faith, I hope this week you really think about the fact that Jesus is God. Not just, Jesus in the stories, not just Jesus walking on water, not just the Jesus who lived here on earth, the fact that he is God. And that should make a huge difference in our lives. Because we should, know the words that he said. We should know what he is commanding us to do, and we should follow after those things. We should follow after him. We need to make that decision. And the only reason we need to make that decision is because he is God. That makes everything worth it. We talked about why Jesus is worth following. Well, it's because he is God. And so if it's true, if he is God, then it means everything. It's so important and it changes everything. And so here's my question to you. Who do you say Jesus is? Who do you personally think Jesus is? And if you believe that he is God, what difference has that made in your life? How could it change your life? Now think about your friends. Who do they think Jesus is? And how could knowing who Jesus is, knowing that he is God, how could that change their lives as well? It's something to think about, and we're going to talk even more about this week in our small groups.